Hello, everyone, and welcome to a PhRMA Foundation webinar. This one is transitioning from academe to industry. And for those of you who are not familiar with the PhRMA Foundation, I'll just tell you a little bit about our organization before we jump into the content. So we foster biomedical innovation by providing grants and fellowships to early career researchers in these four areas: drug discovery, drug delivery, translational medicine, and health outcomes research. We fund pre-docs, postdocs, and early career faculty. We also offer many free resources like this one. So as you can see on this slide, we have a collection of webinars on how to apply for and ideally get PhRMA Foundation grants. We also have blogs on tips on how to write a successful grant application, including Q&As or little tips and tricks like you see here. And if you are new to this webinar series, we offer webinars on a variety of topics. And coming up, we'll have Eli Lilly and Company's postdoctoral fellows talk about their fellowship experience. And so mark the date, Tuesday, November 19th. That promises to be a very interesting discussion. We could not do this work without our supporters, so I want to thank those of you from companies, and these are the ones who support us. Every dollar we raise from these supporters annually goes right back out to grants and fellowships, and so we very much thank you for your support. We're also easy to find. If you have any follow-up questions after this webinar, this is how to find us. And next, I'm going to introduce our speakers. Sihim Boyal is Senior Director at Merck. She received one of our Research Starter grants while working as a Research Assistant Professor at the State University of New York at Buffalo. She's an expert in clinical pharmacology and model-informed drug discovery and development, and thus her research attracted pharma company funding before she made the move to industry. Magdia De Jesus is Director, Scientific Strategy and Portfolio Lead at Pfizer's Chief Medical Office. She was also formerly an academic professor, and her research laboratory was at the New York State Department of Health, where she developed fungal-derived vaccine delivery vehicles. In December 2019, just before the COVID pandemic began, she made a transition from academe, joining Pfizer's Vaccine Research and Development Department, where she had a very relaxing 2020 and 2021. Yes, that's a joke. She later transitioned to Chief Medical Office, where she contributes to the scientific portfolio across the Pfizer enterprise. And Stacia Lewandowski is Senior Scientist at Novartis Institute for Biomedical Research. She is also a former PhRMA Foundation awardee. She received one of our pre-doc fellowships pursuing her doctoral degree in pharmacology and physiology from Drexel University. She went on to do a postdoc at the Medical University of South Carolina. She then decided to pursue an industry career, and in her current role, she continues to conduct research related to her expertise in vivo pharmacology and cellular and behavioral neuroscience. As a way to start, I would love for you to briefly describe your transition. So if you would go ahead, Sihim, will you go first?
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone to this wonderful webinar. It's indeed a very exciting topic, and thank you to the PhRMA Foundation for providing this opportunity to share our experiences. So yeah, my name is Sihim Boyal, and as I was introduced, now I work at Merck. I am a senior director. I made my transition from an assistant professorship position at the University of Florida to large pharma Merck around the pandemic period. So my first day, and I recall that very well, with Merck was in February 2020, right at the start. And I remember that I started at Merck, and then a colleague came to me and said, go back to your home because from now on, you know, it's the pandemic. So that was my first contact with the pharma industry. But to be more serious, the transition from really academia to the industry came, I would say, as a building blocks. While when I was in academia, through my research, I had a laboratory, but also specialized in generating data in the lab, building hypotheses, using mathematical modeling to describe the data and tackle some medical unmet needs. I was also funded by the pharma industry, and I worked very closely with the pharma industry. And through that professional relationship with the pharma industry, I realized that my academic work was very rewarding through teaching, mentoring the students. I love that part. At the same time, I started being very curious to see the value of the work we do really as academe and bring that to the patient. And I hadn't had that opportunity to really see how the work could be implemented to really for the patient outcome. So through that interaction and really the curiosity working with professionals in the pharma industry, I realized that I had that really motivation to wanted to transition from the academia to the industry. And of course, it's not a decision that you take very easily. It takes time. You think about it. You consult with friends, with colleagues, and others. And also you weigh the pros and cons. We say you always know what you leave, but you never know what you're going to get. So that was huge actually in the decision to switch into academia, but truly to the industry, but truly the drive was really working with professionals, bringing all that translational approach, all that work that was done in the lab to the patient and see how the scientific thinking really helped the patient. So that was really the transition and the motive from my side.
Fantastic. Magdia, would you tell us your story?
Thanks so much, Amy. First of all, thank you so much to the PhRMA Foundation for the invitation. And it's so wonderful to be here with all of you to share our stories. So I was an academic professor, microbiologist, immunologist by training, and the epitome of my career was going to be to reach full professorship. It was a very linear track. I had no connections to industry. And in my research laboratory, we spent a lot of time developing prototype vaccines for oral delivery. And during the time that I was in the lab, the students were doing very well. We were publishing. I was, part of the submission to many, many different grant cycles. And one evening, I kept thinking about um, my impact in this particular role. And I kept thinking about it because I wanted to make a larger impact across science. And I felt that in my research laboratory, yes, I was making an impact with the students and the community, the scientific community that I was part of, but I felt that I needed to do something bigger. And so I wanted also to learn how to develop a real vaccine that goes into the arms of patients. And developing these prototype vaccines was not going to get me there. And so one evening I applied to Pfizer vaccines. I thought I was never going to get the interview because I was purely academic. And so long story short, I got the interview. And I joined Pfizer vaccines in December of 2019. And as you know, the world completely changed by March of 2020. And I was fully immersed into this experience of what it was like, not only to develop the vaccine against the COVID-19, but also I had the opportunity to see the development of the antiviral. And so that also helped me really think about all of the science that's happening across the company. And I fell in love with the portfolio. So in 2021, I joined the chief medical office, where now I get to see and be part of not only the vaccines portfolio, but across the entire company.
That's very exciting. One of the first drug delivery scientists I met was from Pfizer and worked on the pill. And I thought that was just so cool that I got to meet the real scientists who helped make the pill, which was very exciting. Stacia, tell us your transition story.
Sure, I'm happy to. So I'm a little bit more junior than the other two women that are here with us today, but I think that's also very helpful because I'm sure there are some more junior folks in the audience. So I had always had an interest in drug discovery and industry, but of course, I went on straight away to get my PhD after college. And quite frankly, I had an incredible PhD experience. I loved it. I would go back and get another one if it was feasible for my life. Um, and because I had such a great experience in grad school, I had decided that I would go on and do a postdoc just in case I liked it enough to stick around to pursue academia as a career. And so I went down to Charleston for my postdoc. And I also had an absolutely wonderful time during my postdoc. But I think the realization for me was I looked around at all of these other postdocs who had been there 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, had cell papers, nature papers, were incredibly independent, had students, basically had their own mini labs within the larger lab that I was in. And they were applying to, and no joke, like hundreds of universities, and were struggling to land interviews for faculty jobs. And to me, I loved the science, I loved the work that I was doing, but it felt like I was sacrificing aspects of my personal life to be able to pursue academia. And quite frankly, I wasn't really willing to keep doing that. You know, I was struggling to pay rent on a postdoc salary. I was long distance from my fiance. And I still kind of had that itch, you know, what would industry be like? And seeing those other postdocs struggle to get faculty jobs and having to move to states they weren't excited to live in to be faculty at universities, I decided that I wasn't willing to make that sacrifice for my own personal life. And so then I started looking around and really contemplating going to industry. And I applied to a couple places, had a couple interviews, and ultimately ended up at Novartis. And what I like about my journey is that as more of a junior career person, I'm still very happy at the bench. Like I like working with animals. I like working with my hands. I still love to pipette. And so now in my role at Novartis, I was happy to join a very like bench heavy role. And so that's what I've been doing. And I'm very pleased. And like the other women were saying, I also felt like the research that I was doing as a postdoc and even as a grad student I felt pretty far removed from helping people. I very much have an appreciation for basic research, but it felt like this protein I was looking at in this one brain region during this one behavior didn't feel as though it was going to impact patients. And so I definitely feel as though my work now has more of an impact.
I love that. I would like you to now think back to when you were making the decision. I think there are a lot of people in this webinar who are curious if an industry job is one they want or not. Now, there are people in this webinar who know they want to, and we're going to answer their questions next. But for those who are questioning, just go through a little bit of your process because you each went through different processes to get here. So who wants to start? Sahim?
I can start, yes. So actually, the thinking process took me a really long time. And the reason is that I was truly enjoying my academic career. I love the lab I was in. I love the research niche I have built with my students and postdocs and scholars. The pros and cons are really hard when you love what you do. It's just that at some point you have to face yourself first where I would say, as I mentioned in the beginning, you know what you are leaving, you don't know what you're going to get. And I think that was the very first question I asked myself, what am I going to get? And I was mainly looking at, I would say, the challenges than the opportunities. I was looking at, okay, I am going to work in an environment where I am losing my academic freedom. So that was the very first thing that popped up in my mind. I would like to go there, and do all that I cannot do in academia and really see the impact of my research and my work on the patient. But at the same time, can I do it? That was the very first question. Will I be will I have too many boundaries? I would say the perception I had was that industry was a very closed environment. Everything is confidential. You don't share, you don't show. You are in such a high competitive landscape. You want to be the first. That nothing comes out of the nothing scientific really comes out of the industry, and all the science comes from the academia. I have to admit I was completely wrong. And I admitted here in this webinar that this thinking was completely wrong. It was just, I would say, my subconscious trying to hold me back from making the decision. So that was really my first challenge, the pros and cons. The other really challenge, as I said, I was looking mostly at the challenges. The other challenge was that now I am free. I have my laboratory. It's my small environment. I am entrepreneur in the end. In this space, I have my student. I am the I would say maybe the lead in this group. If I join the industry, I will be again reporting to someone, working with someone. We say you work in a matrix in the industry, which is true. And I have again to admit in this webinar that it's great to do that. It's great to work with others, to have I would say, a mentor, supervisor, manager, to have colleagues from different perspectives, different functional area. You brainstorm together, you work together, you share the science. What I thought were challenges and were holding me back in making really my decision, in the end came to be positives. What drove me really to, in the end, overcome these challenges and this fear was really talking to others, talking to colleagues who have done it, but also talking to friends of mine. We were together in the in the grad school. They went right away to the industry. I went to academia, but we kept the friendship, and then really asked them about what is the industry, how do you work, what's the environment. These are my fears. Am I correct in my fears? Can they be, can I overcome them? So communication, discussion with professionals, your friends, colleagues, people who share these experiences, was absolutely, the light that really helped me to make the decision. Even my collaborators with whom I was working, I could, approach them and talk to them. Knowing the expertise I was going to gain as well, by expanding, right, my skill set, which was highly academic, not really applied. That also was a drive to me, because it's a professional growth, but it's also a personal growth. There is this reward that, hey, my work gets to the patient in the end, help the patient. So I would say these were kind of thinking mostly of the challenges, but at the same time trying to communicate with others to understand the fears and these challenges. And in the end, now with experience, I realized that, I was wrong. These challenges in the end are great opportunities. And I'm thrilled actually now in this position and working, for this company.
I love that you had fears, and one of your cons for making the transition ended up being a pro. That's beautiful. And you still publish in your academic field.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we publish a lot. Of course, you have to go through the clearance and so on, but we do publish. That was really a misperception from my side. I was really thinking everything is confidential, and so it's not true. In fact, they encourage you to publish because you really demonstrate the capabilities of the company, right? So it's highly rewarding, I would say.
Fantastic. And Stacia, I'm going to go to you next since you're still at the bench. Tell me how, and I think you had fewer industry contacts than Sahim. So why don't you talk about your transition process a little bit?
For me, when I was considering going to industry, it was a little bit kind of an identity crisis, even though I hadn't been in academia super long, right? Like I had volunteered in labs in college, I got a PhD, and I did a short postdoc, so I didn't have my own lab. But when you're surrounded by academics who live, breathe, and eat academia, it can be really hard to feel like you're making the right decision because everyone around you is staying in their postdoc and is pursuing a faculty position. So I really had to just find the courage within myself to apply and make the leap. And I didn't really know what I was afraid of and what to expect, but I will say that upon getting to industry, I still feel just as invigorated and enriched as I did as a postdoc and a grad student, maybe if not a little bit more. The scientists that you're surrounded by in industry, and for me, I have a very research heavy position, like you've mentioned. Everybody is pretty excited to be here every day. It's a fast pace, it's motivating. And so, yeah, for me, just I wasn't in academia super long, but it was still kind of an identity crisis to where I felt like I wasn't sure if I was making the right decision. And for those of you who might feel that way, there are plenty of people who are friendly enough on LinkedIn that you can reach out and ask for informational interviews. I think that helps so much to get a sense of what the culture is like at different companies. But yeah.
And we have a webinar on how to do informational interviews, so you can check that out. Magdia, tell me about your transition, which you did as a scientist, and I think you're more at a strategic role now, but tell us about the transition you made.
Yes, thank you. So, like Sihem, I loved being an academic. I loved having my students. I loved being at the bench like Stacia. And it was very scary to even think about making that transition because you often hear, oh, you're going to cross into the dark side. And as I shared earlier, I didn't have any connections to industry. But when that door opened and that interview was very much present, I learned that you have amazing scientists in industry. A lot of them were former professors. They publish. They encourage you to stay connected to academia, to partner with academia. And when I saw that the transition wasn't going to be as scary as I thought, I decided to have the courage and take the plunge. And I'll share with you a moment. It almost feels like a book because when I dumped my last cell lines from my laboratory into bleach, it felt so final. And I thought, what am I doing? But I kept going back to that interview and remembering that, wow, these colleagues are going to be so amazing. And you know what? That's exactly how it turned out. I work with amazing people, whether they're scientists or lawyers or finance people. You become exposed to so many different disciplines in industry. I've just learned so much just by being part of industry, and I don't have any regrets in making that transition.
I love it. I love it. Before we get on to questions about applying and, what is it like in industry, is there a benefit to doing a postdoc before transitioning? Because I know we have pre-docs, postdocs, and current faculty members on. Any opinions?
I can comment on that. I think it depends on what your career aspirations are in industry. On my end, I didn't do a postdoc because I thought it would make me more competitive for industry. I did a postdoc because I wasn't sure if I was going to stay in academia. But there are some positions in industry, like different levels, where they require a postdoc. So for me at Novartis, to come in at principal scientist 1, you basically have to do a postdoc. And you can level up faster internally if you have done one versus if you haven't done one, if that makes sense. So I think it just depends on how anxious or urgent it is for you to get out of academia, and to what your career aspirations are. Like you can absolutely get your PhD and go right to industry. You're just not going to start at a very high level, and it might take you a little bit longer to climb, but that's about it.
I think that's very helpful. Any additions to that before we move on?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on the field where you get your PhD from, and also where you would like to get into the industry. So then you can assess really if you want to do that transition as a postdoc. And I come from the angle where, for example, in my education, we do mathematical modeling, which is high demand in the industry. So most of the time, students get their PhD and right away they have positions in the industry. In fact, it's a domain where people don't do postdocs because, you compare the salaries postdoc and the first real job, we call it, in the industry, it kind of make the difference. I would say postdoc can be highly useful to refine skills, to also learn more in a particular field, because and you can use the postdoc, depending of course on the postdoc and the field of the postdoc, you can use it as experience. And I know many who in our field have also used their postdoc to not get right away into, I would say, an entry level, but rather maybe a higher position. So I would say it's highly dependent on where you get or which field you get the PhD from, computer science and so on. You might not need a postdoc. And if you do, it's really for you to refine and find new venues for, it's really your own interest because you target a particular position in the industry.
Sounds like people do need to do a little networking, because in health outcomes research and value assessment, in that field, I don't think a postdoc is necessary to get an industry job at all. So that's great perspective. Magdia, I'm going to go to you next with the new topic, which is on what is industry looking for in someone. So how is applying for an industry job different? What are hiring managers looking for? What are your tips and tricks to those listening who have no idea how to make the first step?
Great question. So hiring managers, it depends. Some roles are very specific for very specific skill sets. For example, if you know flow cytometry or HPLC chromatography. Some of them are incredibly specific because it takes a very highly skilled scientist to be able to do these types of jobs, for example. However, in addition to the specific scientific skill sets, there's also a holistic view of a candidate. So questions that are often asked: can the team work with this person? What would this person bring to the table in addition to their skill sets? How can this person contribute to teaching others within the team a new skill set? So it's often seen in two categories or multiple categories across. So don't think that just because you don't check off all the boxes in a job description, you're not even going to get an interview. I think it's so important that when you do find a job description, address each bullet point and share with the hiring manager what are your strongest skill sets, but also skill sets that you do lack. But how are you going to learn as being a member of this team? So it's really important to think about where you want to land, first of all. And second of all, how are you going to contribute to a team, to an entire matrix of a company? And if you go into applying for a job role with a very open and flexible mindset, it will definitely be a great experience. Even if you don't get the position and you do get the interview, guess what? You have just networked with a new team. You get to learn about a company. And so it is a win-win opportunity for both the applicant and the employer.
I like how you phrased that. Maybe you don't have everything in the job listing, but you can still apply if you have the core skills necessary and simply address your weaknesses honestly and how you intend to fill them. And then add a little, like we say in New Orleans, lanyap, here's something else I can bring to the team. I love that answer. Tim, what would you add?
No, yeah, absolutely. I think that's outstanding. That's what when you interview, usually you always have an interview panel, and they made it such that that interview panel, they are from different functional area, which means that they are specialized differently, and they all ask you questions that are not only based on your skill set, but also trying to test your character. For example, when you do your presentation, oral presentation, they interrupt you in purpose. What we don't do at all in academia. We let the student or the postdoc or the invited speaker finish all the presentation, and then we ask questions. In the industry is the opposite. So you would feel it's rude. In fact, not at all. They are testing your personality. Are you going to be angry? Are you going to lose your thoughts? Are you going to still, get back and keep running? So in a way, that's a skill set they are also looking for. And I totally agree with Magdia. You need to add a little bit of value. It's not only technical, but also personal, I would say. So coming from academia, teaching, we had a lot of opportunities to practice teaching. We are kind of, teaching is in a way something that add high value in the industry, because it translates into your communication, it translates into, your collaboration with others. And that's a value I can't emphasize enough as something really to transfer. People would think, oh, I will not do teaching at all, or so on. Actually, it's a huge, huge, huge asset coming from academia in the industry. So yeah, definitely, I totally agree with what has been said, and be mindful that personality also count a lot in these, interviews.
So Stacia, I'm going to phrase it a little bit different. You can answer however you want. But you're speaking to a lot of postdocs right now, which is where you were when you made the transition. How would you suggest they go about applying for and also showing their best side once they get the interview?
Yeah, it's a good question. And like they both have said, personality fit is huge in industry. And I think that I can speak on the research side. Like if you're a postdoc and you're happy to have a research heavy bench position, of course they're going to care a lot about, the assays that you can run at the bench and your technical skill set. But more importantly, it's all about personality, because you can imagine these companies, these are some big companies that people are applying to. These departments, neuroscience departments, cancer biology, massive departments, lots and lots and lots of people. And it is, as everyone has said before, a matrixed environment. So you work with so many teams. Like there's a histology team, a surgical models team, this team, that team. And so you're typically going to be working with a lot more people than maybe you're used to as a postdoc or a grad student. And I think that is one of the larger concerns for people that are hiring on the industry side is you can have a great technical skill set, but they want to make sure that you're going to be somebody who can come in and get along with all of the personalities that are here and work in a cross-functional matrixed kind of way. So it kind of seems silly, but it's a lot about personality fit, and it goes both ways, right? Like you might interview with a company and interview with the team that you could be working with, and you could think, oh no, I don't get along with these people, I don't like these people, and that's okay too. Like when you're interviewing, it also has to be a good fit for yourself as well.
I think that goes back even to how we began. When you're thinking about making this transition and you're unsure, you have to ask yourself, am I okay working up, down, and side to side? And am I okay if I'm uh, an expert in this, working cross-functionally with another group regularly, so I think that's a really good point, even at the beginning, before you even decide to make the fit. And then that advice, niche pick, make sure you're interviewing them for your time as much as the other way around, is something it took me a few decades to learn, but that's really good to say at the very beginning. So I'm going to ask a little bit about, so quickly, how would you find job opportunities? I think some of you found them just looking at company websites, right? Is that how you all found them? Okay.
I actually found mine, the PI that was hiring posted it on LinkedIn, and I happened to see it on LinkedIn, so I applied through LinkedIn.
Wow. And what are some other ways people can find out about industry jobs?
I applied through Indeed, but I also spent a lot of time reading different types of blogs from industry or societies that partnered with industry.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some academic organizations have industry job boards.
Yeah, and I think also through the process of thinking of switching from academia to the industry, when you attend conferences, when you attend events as well, that's really great opportunity to meet professionals, and you meet them also in a different context, a rather relaxing context as well. So you make a lot of connections, but at the same time, there are job boards, in conferences, and you can approach them. And sometimes you can even hear about positions before even they are posted. So it gives you a little bit of leeway in a way to prepare. Um, you know, from my side, for example, I was in a field where, we do have a lot of connections, I would say, with the pharma industry, but it's not that only. It's also through LinkedIn, through sometimes you get calls by recruiters as well. So don't hang up on them. Maybe, they are offering you your next job. So there are opportunities to find jobs. And I interviewed in one job I found on the Science, the journal Science, right? Sometimes I found it in Science. So even these journals, sometimes they advertise for really positions that you can apply for. So all sources are great, I think.
I wanted to underline recruiter. Just keep this in mind for the rest of your career. Always answer the phone when a recruiter calls, even if you love your job, and then help them find someone for that job. And even if you don't know the perfect person, a recruiter loves when you send them to other good candidates, because recruiters are trying to fill a very specific position, but they're always thinking about the next position they're going to have to fill. And so they like to build a Rolodex. So we should do a whole webinar on how to talk with a recruiter. I do want to talk about being in industry before we go to the Q&A, and I'm going to combine two rather large topics. And so when you answer in succession, just pile on. So first talk about navigating the transition, and then how to excel once you're there. So who wants to go first? Magdia?
I can go first. So there's one key word that applies to both, and that's networking. Because when you first walk through the doors of industry, there are so many people that are part of many, many different types of disciplines. So you want to continue to connect. Sometimes companies have these organizational charts, which are incredibly helpful because you can see who's linked to whom in this large matrix. And so when you meet one colleague, then you connect with the next. And it can be as easy as you have a project, you're working on a project, and you want to learn more information, or you want to have coffee with them. You think that their career is very interesting. So network, just to get an idea of the landscape in the company. And then the same as you continue to transition and move up in the ladder, same thing. It's networking across.
And at Pfizer, I imagine you can network all day long, 24/7, and still not reach everyone.
For an entire career, you can network there.
Tim, add on to that.
So add on to that, I would say you always start with your micro environment, right, where the position you have been recruited for. And then I would say mentoring or finding a mentor within your organization, someone who is, higher up. And I will tell you, in the industry, people love mentoring. They absolutely love mentoring. So you have mentors, call it sponsor coaching. Anyway, it's mentorship, in a way. They help you really navigate the company because, like in large pharma, it's not easy. But also keep mentors that are outside your organization as well, because it's always good to have, an outside thinking. Remember, it's a new environment for you. So you are learning. Give yourself the time to learn because it takes time. And also, when you start coming from academia, it's a culture change. So adaptability might not be, coming easily to everyone, right? We all need some time to adjust. So you need that support. And the support can be internal from the company, your manager, your friends around you in your micro environment, your mentors, but also from outside, because having that third party, I would say, help, advice, is always welcome and helpful in a new environment. So I agree, networking, and I would add mentorship, meaning being the mentee of someone and the mentor of someone else.
I love that. That's also a way to keep that teaching aspect of the academic field in your industry career. Stacia, what would you add about transitioning and then thriving?
Yeah, I will say for me, I've been here 2 years and I'm still learning, and sometimes I feel like I still don't quite know what is going on. The culture shock is definitely real. Coming from academia, being a grad student, and then being in a postdoc lab, and then coming to Novartis, where I'm just at one of 3 research sites, and they're all massive. Definitely a lot of culture shock. And then also another thing for me was, I think, being an academic and working on your own projects and doing everything yourself and kind of being a little bit possessive over your work. Another thing that was hard for me here and was a big adjustment is that you'll collect tissue and hand it off to somebody else. Like, you're not going to see your project all the way through, so to speak, due to the nature of the environment here and it being a matrix. But I do agree with others that the best way to survive and thrive is really just through networking and making friends. And the other thing too is that a lot of the people that you meet and seek out in industry as your mentors and your colleagues and your friends are also, for the most part, ex-academics. Like, you're going to have people that are higher up who were at Harvard for 10 years, who were at Yale for 10 years, who was somewhere else for 15 years. And now they've been, at Pfizer or Novartis or Merck or wherever for like 6 or 7 years. And you're going to learn that these people had the same transition period as you, and look at them now. So definitely seek out anyone and everyone that you can. And yes, people in industry love to mentor because, again, a lot of them are ex-academics.
I love that as a great transition. I'm going to Q&A, and for those of you who have put questions in the chat, if we don't get to them all, we will do a blog and follow up on the answers we don't get to. But one question was exactly what you were talking about. How does industry view the faculty experience, especially rank, assistant, associate, and professor, as it relates to an equivalent position within industry? So take these 3 ranks of professors and tell us what kinds of job titles are appropriate for them to apply to. Magdia.
So at the assistant professor level, it would be things like director. The associate professor level would be senior director. And then the full faculty would be the executive director or VP. That's more on the corporate ladder. But at the bench level, if you're an assistant professor, you can start anywhere as senior principal scientist or principal scientist. And then everything up the scientific rank, which is fellow or senior, very senior scientist as you keep going up the ranks.
Is it the same, Sahin, at your organization?
So at my organization, I would say the same pretty much. I would add actually that it really depends on the skill set you bring in and the department you are going to be recruited for. So if really they see that, you will be the one who is going to be, you have the skill set, you really are going to do the job, you have demonstrated leadership, in academia, and that is highly transferable, in the industry. They will be really fair. There's one thing I noticed and I learned, the industry in India, they are fair to give you the position you deserve according to really your CV, but also to your, as we said, personality, what you bring at the interview. I would say at that moment, they decide. Because you do the interview with the panel, and then the panel, they debrief, right, about the candidates whom to select. And there, some candidates, I have been in these panels, some candidates, they are offered potentially higher position than they have interviewed for because they bring that skills and they don't want to use that candidate. Others, they are offered the lower position that they have applied for because of the same reasons potentially, or opposite reasons, I would say. So it really depends also on the skill set you bring in and the day of the interview, but you go with the concept that there is a huge fairness from the industry and the HR, I would say, of the industry to really give the candidate the level they deserve and they think the candidate should be at.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Stacia, you can answer that, but I do have another question for you if you wanted to move on. Could you please elaborate on some transferable skills from academia to industry?
That's a tough question to answer because I think it really depends on what you want to do in industry, right? And so industry is kind of this broad umbrella term that we use to kind of reflect these companies, right? But there's medical writing, regulatory affairs, there's a clinical side, there's a marketing side. And for me, being on the research side, from the research perspective, that question is a little bit easy to answer, but it's harder for all of those other fields that are within industry. But from the research perspective, if anyone in the audience is still interested in being at the bench and doing biomedical research, when you are applying for these jobs, they really try to match, for the most part, like maybe about 80% of the actual skills that they have listed in the job posting, like qPCR, stereotactic surgery, Western blots. They will list what kind of skills they want you to have. So I think from a technical biomedical research standpoint, that's a little bit easier because you can be like, oh, well, I have expertise in flow cytometry. And if you don't, and you're really interested in that job, you can probably obtain that experience before applying. But I think that question is a little bit harder to answer for those that are interested in being on the clinical side or regulatory affairs, et cetera.
Well, then I'm going to jump to Magdia because you seem to have eyes on those different types of positions. What would you add? What are transferable skills outside of the technical?
Absolutely. So communications. And this is one part of my transition that was a bit challenging because in academia, you communicate your science to students and postdocs. But in industry, you have to know how to communicate across different expertise and different fields because it's a really large and matrix organization. So that's a huge piece of it. The other piece is writing. How well do you communicate in your writing, whether you're publishing or you're writing an email to someone who's in a completely different department? That's also really important. Also, how you get along, and that's really important. How do you connect with your colleagues, not only on a personal and professional level, but also at a compassionate level, because the science and the work that we do across these companies can be often very, very difficult. and it can be incredibly exhausting. How do you bring that human piece to your job? And also mentoring and sponsoring and teachings. If you've had teaching experience, that's really important because it allows you the flexibility to connect in different ways, right? Everybody's brain is wired very differently. So if you know how to teach, you can communicate and teach and connect with people across a very large matrix organization.
I think you're making a great point, and people need to remember teaching is also, you do different types in academe. You teach obviously in a classroom, but then you also mentor and teach within the lab itself. So I think you've made a really excellent point. So I'm going to ask some kind of quick fire. One is, sorry, I ran. Is it okay to apply to multiple jobs at one company? So for example, a postdoctoral position and also a research scientist position. Is that okay? Or should you
I
just
would
go
say
one
there's, yeah, I would say there is no policy from the company that would, forbid you from doing so. It's just that if the positions are slightly different, you will really need to show the motivation why you have selected, both if they are very different. Now, if they slightly look alike or, they have some common descriptors, then it makes sense that, you would like to apply for. Maybe ask yourselves whether you really want within that company to apply for both positions. So this is something to do first with yourselves. Go carefully through the job description, see which of these two positions you would have more chances potentially to, get the position. But I would say there isn't any, policy or anything that say you cannot. It really should come from you and your own assessment.
just in my personal opinion and professional experience, I also think it's good to just let everyone know. You don't want Pfizer people talking to each other and figure out you're the top candidate at both. So if you're doing a cover letter or an introductory email, you should definitely tell both groups. And if you're talented, they'll fight over you. But I don't think they need to find out from each other. I think they need to find out from the candidate themselves. So I'm going to just keep on going with the rapid fire. So Magdia, how long does the hiring process take? And Stacia, I'm going to ask you too, since she was a full professor and you were a
Yeah,
postdoc.
it depends on at the need of that particular unit. It can be as quick as a month or as long as 3 months. It depends on the need of that unit.
And that's so different from academe, where it could be a year in advance. Stacia, how about on the sciences side?
Yeah, what Magdia said is completely accurate. I mean, we had a team here who was in desperate need of somebody and hired over the summer, and that position was filled in less than 2 months. And then we have somebody else who also needs somebody, and they're taking their time and going through all the resumes and interviewing a bunch of people and then asking everyone their opinion. And this one's taking like closer to 4 months. So it really just depends on the team that's hiring and how urgent it feels to them.
But again, we're talking about an extraordinarily different timeline from an academic timeline. So to answer the question in a word, quickly. So another one is CV or resume. You can only, your answer has to be one word.
Resume.
Okay, resume.
Resume.
Okay.
Resume.
All right. We hope to do another webinar on how to make your CV or a resume, but that's going to be traumatic for all involved. So we'll save that for later. Talk about international applicants. Do some of your companies fund visas or, I'm sorry, help with the work visa, or does your company only hire US citizens? If you are able to speak to that. No.
I'll be very honest. I'm not into the HR, but let's see, if I have to think within my department, we are a global company. So we do hire globally, I would say. So certainly situations like that have had happened. But we also offer remote. Nowadays with remote, I believe that maybe visa hasn't become really much of an issue for abroad. However, once the candidates are hired, most pharmas later on sponsor the visas and sponsor also the legal documents and so on. So I would say once hired, yeah.
Thank you.
Agree
Does
with-
the number of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I said I agree with Siham.
Okay, great. Does the number of published papers matter?
I think it can. I interviewed at another company before Novartis, and my first author paper wasn't out yet. It was under review. And I actually got a lot of pushback from the people that were interviewing me, and they didn't seem happy and or impressed that my paper wasn't out yet. So I think it just depends on the company.
I would imagine quality matters too, if not quantity.
I think
All right.
it's definitely helpful. It positions you in a strong way because it shows that you can organize your thoughts and you can deliver, right? This in industry, it's about delivering. So if you have a publication, you can take an idea, a scientific idea, and deliver it into the final publication.
Fantastic. So we're going to move to closing statements. I know we didn't cover even half of the questions, so we will do a follow-up blog answering your questions. I would love for you to make closing statements. I'm going to go in opposite order from introduction. So Stacia, any closing remarks?
I would just say that depending on your individual career goals, like if publishing is really important to you, if doing a postdoc for X amount of years is really important to you, all of those things are fine. You can still do those things and land an industry job. So for me, I would just say there is no perfect time. If you're ready now, apply now. And if you're not, if you want to wrap up your manuscript or if you want to take another year, that's okay too. It's just completely up to the individual.
Great. See him.
I would say while thinking about the transition from academia to the industry, take your time, assess your pros and cons, and also communicate with others. Try to find either in conferences, friends, LinkedIn. There are plenty of resources and people who will be very willing to help you make the decision. Look at the positions from the micro environment, but also the macro environment, I would say, because it's a life decision, and you will have doubts until the last minute. Even when you are on the job, you still will have doubts saying, did I make the right decision? It's a roller coaster in the end. But my recommendation is take time, talk, discuss, and once you make the decision, don't think back, because only the good can happen, and all the challenges will become at some point really opportunities you have embraced.
Thank you. Magdia, bring us home.
I would say be courageous, be bold, be comfortable with the uncomfortable, stay very flexible, and take the leap of faith. It's not the dark side.
Well said. Well, thank you all, and thank you to all of the participants today, and we will follow up in the future with more information.